Johnny Carson is remembered as one of television's most legendary hosts, a man famous for his charm, flexibility, and rare ability to connect with almost anyone who sat across from him. Yet even with his famously accommodating nature, there were moments when certain guests tested his patience, and none stood out more than Joan Rivers was one of the most dramatic rise and fall stories in late-night television history. What began as friendship and mentorship slowly curdled into resentment and, ultimately, total exile. Early in her career, Rivers was one of Carson's favorite guests on The Tonight Show. He admired her razor-sharp wit, fearless humor, and lightning-fast banter, so much so that he frequently invited her back and even trusted her to guest host the show. Carson himself had given Rivers one of her very first major breaks on national television in 1965, and by the early 1980s she was a regular presence, leading many to believe she was being quietly groomed as his eventual successor. And despite their undeniable on-air chemistry, the partnership wasn't without tension. Behind the scenes, Carson reportedly found Rivers difficult to manage at times. Her brash personality and aggressive comedic style occasionally clashed with Carson's more controlled, smooth approach to hosting. Still, those differences were not what ultimately destroyed their relationship. The real breaking point came in 1986, when Rivers accepted an offer to host The Late Show starring Joan Rivers on Fox, becoming the first woman to headline her own late-night talk show. Crucially, she did not inform Carson personally before the announcement went public. Carson felt blindsided and deeply betrayed, interpreting her move as an act of disloyalty. When Rivers tried to call and explain, Carson refused to take her calls and never spoke to her again. From that moment on, he permanently banned Joan Rivers from The Tonight Show, turning a once-celebrated partnership into one of late night's most infamous feuds. The ban on Joan Rivers appearing on The Tonight Show lasted for nearly 3 decades, remaining in place even after Johnny Carson retired. Out of respect for Carson, his successor Jay Leno upheld the decision. Rivers did not return to the show until 2014, when Jimmy Fallon took over as host. But Rivers was not the only guest who made Carson uncomfortable. The relationship between Johnny Carson and Bob Hope. Though both were towering icons of American comedy, their relationship behind the scenes was anything but warm. Carson thrived on smooth interviews, quick wit, and spontaneous, free-flowing conversation, while Hope arrived with a rigid, heavily scripted routine. As Hope grew older and became a frequent Tonight Show guest, he relied increasingly on prepared jokes and cue cards, delivering rehearsed one-liners rather than engaging in natural banter. This sharp contrast in styles reportedly frustrated Carson, turning what should have been legendary comedy encounters into some of the most awkward and forced interviews in the show's history. Quiet proof that even comedy giants don't always click. Bob Hope often came on the show expecting Johnny Carson to set him up perfectly for pre-written punchlines, which made the interviews feel less like real conversations and more like tightly scripted comedy routines. This was something Carson reportedly found dull and uninspiring. While Carson thrived on spontaneity and quick, organic exchanges, Hope's appearances were formulaic and predictable. His team would frequently send The Tonight Show producers advance lists of topics along with prepared jokes, essentially reducing Carson to a supporting prop rather than an active interviewer. That lack of genuine interaction increasingly frustrated Carson, who once described interviewing Hope as being like talking to a giant promotional machine. Compounding the issue was Hope's status as Hollywood royalty, which meant the show often felt obligated to book him whether or not he had anything fresh or interesting to share. Unlike many guests who came to entertain or open up personally, Hope's visits were usually tied to whatever special or project he was promoting, making the interviews feel more like polished advertisements than authentic late-night moments. A very different kind of discomfort arose with Fred Rogers, better known as Mr. Rogers. Both Johnny Carson and Mr. Rogers were towering figures in American television, yet their styles could not have been more opposite. Carson thrived on sharp wit, sarcasm, and playful teasing, fueled by spontaneity and lively conversation. Mr. Rogers, by contrast, was soft-spoken, deeply sincere, and deliberately avoided humor that mocked or confronted others. This stark contrast often made Mr. Rogers' appearances on The Tonight Show feel awkward. Carson reportedly didn't enjoy having him as a guest because there was little room for his usual comedic approach. With most guests, Carson could joke, tease, and engage in energetic banter. But Rogers' calm, earnest demeanor left little space for that kind of interaction. He wasn't there to entertain in the traditional late-night sense. He was there to share messages of kindness, emotional understanding, and childhood education. While millions admired his sincerity, it slowed the pace of the interviews and made them feel less dynamic than Carson's typical segments. Adding to the challenge was Mr. Rogers' almost saint-like reputation in children's television. Carson had to tread carefully. Joking too much at Rogers' expense risked making him appear mean-spirited, something he wanted to avoid. At the same time, he couldn't fully draw Rogers into light-hearted banter the way he could with other public figures. The result was an uncomfortable conversational dead zone, where Carson struggled to keep the energy high, making the interview feel stiff and unnatural. Another factor was that The Tonight Show was built for an adult late-night audience, while Rogers brought gentle discussions about feelings and values, an obvious tonal mismatch for the format. Discussions about childhood development simply didn't align with The Tonight Show's late-night tone. While Johnny Carson respected Fred Rogers and admired his work, their vastly different television personas created an awkward dynamic. Carson likely found Rogers challenging not out of personal dislike, but because their styles never truly meshed on screen. Another equally notorious conflict involved Wayne Newton, one of the most infamous feuds in late-night television history. Carson was known for his sharp wit and playful jabs at celebrities, but with Wayne Newton, those jokes gradually crossed a line. On The Tonight Show, Carson frequently mocked Newton's flamboyant style, over-the-top performances, and polished Las Vegas image. His humor often targeted Newton's high voice, carefully groomed appearance, and showmanship, subtly questioning his toughness or masculinity. While many celebrities laughed off Carson's barbs, Newton took them personally. Proud of his success, he deeply resented being the recurring butt of the joke. The tension reached a breaking point when Newton chose to confront Carson directly. Known for his powerful connections in Las Vegas, Newton reportedly stormed into Carson's office and physically intimidated him, warning him to stop the jokes. According to some accounts, the message was unmistakable. If the mockery continued, there would be consequences. Carson, who was accustomed to being in complete control of his show and rarely backing down, was said to be shaken by the encounter. He was not someone who welcomed physical confrontation, and Newton's aggressive approach left a lasting impact. After the incident, Carson noticeably scaled back his jokes about Newton, but the relationship was permanently damaged. From that point on, Carson reportedly did not enjoy having Newton as a guest. While he maintained professionalism on air, Newton's presence was likely uncomfortable, given the unresolved tension between them, unlike other guests who knew how to play along with Carson's humor. With Wayne Newton, things crossed into deeply personal territory, something Johnny Carson strongly disliked. In the end, the feud between Carson and Newton became one of the rare cases where Carson's comedy completely backfired. Newton's refusal to be the butt of the joke, combined with his willingness to confront Carson directly, created a tense and awkward relationship that never fully recovered. Another guest Carson reportedly struggled with was Charlton Heston. Although Carson never publicly expressed open dislike, there were clear reasons why interviews with a legendary actor could feel strained. Heston, famous for epic roles in Ben-Hur, The Ten Commandments, and Planet of the Apes, carried himself with the heavy gravitas of a classic Hollywood leading man. Unlike many actors who embraced humor and playful banter, Heston often remained formal, intense, and reserved. Carson, who thrived on spontaneity and light-hearted exchange, likely found this stiffness limiting and difficult to work around. Compounding the issue was Heston's tendency to be long-winded and overly serious. Whether discussing his films, politics, or personal beliefs, he often delivered lengthy, self-important responses instead of engaging in quick back-and-forth dialogue. Carson preferred guests who could keep the energy high and match his rhythm, and Heston's solemn delivery didn't fit that dynamic. There may have also been subtle tension around Heston's outspoken political views. A staunch conservative and later a prominent gun rights advocate as president of the NRA, Heston's positions sometimes clashed with Hollywood's more centrist or liberal culture. While Carson usually avoided political confrontation and poked fun at both sides, it's possible Heston didn't appreciate being the subject of humor. In the end, Carson likely found Heston difficult not because of hostility, but because their styles simply didn't blend. Where Carson sought lively, humorous exchanges, Heston brought a commanding yet overly serious presence that felt out of place in a late-night entertainment setting. Though always professional, Carson reportedly found interviews with Heston more of a task to manage than a conversation to enjoy. While Johnny Carson respected Harry Belafonte's immense talent and cultural impact, he reportedly found him to be a challenging guest for The Tonight Show. Belafonte, famous for classics like Day-O, the Banana Boat Song, and his lifelong humanitarian work, was never content with being just an entertainer. He was a deeply committed activist, and that seriousness often shaped his on-air conversations. Unlike many guests who came to promote a new project or engage in easygoing banter, Belafonte frequently redirected discussions toward racial justice, civil rights, and global humanitarian causes. Although these were undeniably important issues, they didn't always fit comfortably within the show's light, escapist late-night format. Carson preferred interviews that stayed entertaining, upbeat, and non-confrontational, and he often found it difficult to work his trademark humor into conversations that became politically or socially heavy. While Carson was skilled at handling a wide range of personalities, he was not known for diving deeply into sensitive political discussions, especially topics like race and social justice, which Belafonte regularly addressed with intensity and conviction. Adding to the tension was audience expectation. Viewers tuned in to The Tonight Show looking for laughs and relaxation, and Belafonte's activist-driven approach could shift the tone in a way that felt jarring for a late-night comedy program. Carson was careful to balance seriousness with humor, and guests who leaned too heavily into weighty subjects sometimes made the interviews feel uncomfortable or out of rhythm. That said, Carson always remained professional, and Belafonte was widely respected across the entertainment world. Still, their contrasting approaches, Carson's focus on entertainment and Belafonte's unwavering commitment to activism, created a dynamic that Carson reportedly enjoyed far less than interviews with guests who embraced the show's comedic spirit. Despite his reputation for charm and adaptability, Johnny Carson reportedly had a short list of celebrities he didn't particularly enjoy hosting on The Tonight Show, and Chevy Chase was one of them. The former Saturday Night Live star often rubbed Carson the wrong way, largely because of Chase's well-known arrogance. After skyrocketing to fame in the mid-1970s as the original Weekend Update anchor, Chase quickly developed a reputation in Hollywood for being smug and self-important. Unlike many comedians who came on the show eager to play along with Carson's rhythm and banter, Chase often projected a sense of superiority that clashed with Carson's relaxed yet authoritative hosting style. Another point of friction was Chase's comedic approach. His humor leaned heavily on sarcasm, deadpan delivery, and at times a mean-spirited edge. Carson, while sharp and witty, typically balanced his jokes with warmth and charm. Chase's more cutting, self-indulgent style sometimes disrupted the flow of the show, turning what should have been playful exchanges into moments that felt awkward rather than funny. If a guest couldn't sustain an easy, entertaining back and forth, Carson's interviews could quickly grow tense, and that dynamic reportedly surfaced when Chase took the chair. Carson was also famously cautious around younger comedians who appeared overly ambitious. As an early breakout star from SNL, Chase was rumored to harbor aspirations of becoming the next king of late-night television. That possibility may have made Carson view him less as a friendly guest and more as a potential rival, contributing to the noticeable lack of warmth between them. Johnny Carson and Frank Sinatra were both towering figures in entertainment, yet their interactions on The Tonight Show were occasionally strained. Sinatra was undeniably a major draw, but his larger-than-life personality and occasional arrogance could make him a difficult guest. He had a reputation for being dismissive, or even rude, when circumstances didn't suit him. This attitude sometimes clashed with Carson's more easygoing yet controlled approach. Carson valued structure and respect for the show's format, while Sinatra, accustomed to being the center of attention, didn't always follow the unspoken rules of late-night television. One infamous moment occurred when Sinatra unexpectedly walked on stage during Carson's monologue, interrupting the host, an incident that perfectly captured the underlying tension between two legends used to commanding the spotlight. When Frank Sinatra stepped onto the stage mid-joke during one of Johnny Carson's monologues, Carson handled it with his usual grace and quick humor. Still, the interruption was widely seen as a deliberate power move, one Sinatra seemed to enjoy as he effortlessly seized the spotlight. Moments like that likely tested Carson's patience. He took pride in running a smooth, tightly controlled show, and Sinatra's larger-than-life presence didn't always respect that structure. Off-camera, the tension reportedly continued. Sinatra often arrived with a sizable entourage and a list of demands that could complicate production, something Carson, known for his professionalism and preference for order, may have found distracting or even disrespectful. And despite these frustrations, Carson fully understood Sinatra's immense star power. Every Sinatra appearance was a ratings event, and Carson knew the value of having such a legendary figure on his stage. Even so, the underlying strain between the two men was hard to miss. Carson's ability to navigate those moments with humor and composure only underscored his skill as a host, but Sinatra's diva-like behavior and occasional disregard for the show's rhythm clearly made him a less-than-ideal guest in Carson's eyes. Another complex dynamic unfolded with Bette Midler. Johnny Carson and Midler shared some of the most unforgettable moments in The Tonight Show's history, including her emotional performance on Carson's second-to-last episode in 1992. On camera, their chemistry and mutual respect were undeniable. Yet behind the scenes, there were signs that Carson didn't entirely relish having Midler as a guest. The tension stemmed from personality differences, off-camera interactions, and Midler's bold, outspoken nature. Carson was calm, reserved, and deeply protective of his role as host. He preferred guests who blended smoothly into the show's conversational flow. Midler, by contrast, was fiery, confident, and larger than life. Her commanding energy sometimes clashed with Carson's more understated style, creating an imbalance that, while often compelling for viewers, may have left Carson feeling slightly uncomfortable or even overshadowed. Midler herself later suggested that Carson could be cold to her off-camera, speculating that he might have been unsettled by her confidence and assertiveness. As a strong, independent woman in an era when many male entertainers were unaccustomed to such presence, Midler challenged traditional dynamics. Carson, despite admiring her immense talent, may have struggled to connect with her on a personal level. Midler's performances on the show were frequently show-stopping and emotionally intense, at times shifting the focus entirely away from the host. Her final appearance in 1992, when she sang a heartfelt medley while seated on Carson's desk, bringing him to tears, became one of the most iconic moments in late-night television history. It was a beautiful, poignant farewell, but it also underscored how Midler's powerful presence could dominate the room, reinforcing the complex, sometimes uneasy dynamic between two towering personalities. At times, Bette Midler's commanding presence could completely dominate the show, leaving Johnny Carson feeling sidelined. In the end, while Carson deeply respected Midler's extraordinary talent and the unforgettable moments she brought to The Tonight Show, their contrasting personalities, and the emotional intensity of her performances, likely made her a less comfortable guest for him. Their relationship was marked by professional admiration mixed with subtle personal tension, a reflection of two powerful personalities navigating the delicate balance of late-night television. Over the years, Carson welcomed countless comedians to his stage, but George Carlin proved to be a complicated case. Although Carson invited Carlin several times early in his career, it gradually became clear that their styles and sensibilities were fundamentally mismatched. Carson, while capable of pushing boundaries, generally favored a polished, mainstream comedic approach designed to entertain a broad audience without alienating viewers. Carlin, on the other hand, increasingly embraced a rebellious, countercultural voice, especially in the 1970s, using comedy to confront politics, religion, and social hypocrisy. As Carlin's material grew more provocative, it directly challenged the conventions Carson worked hard to maintain on his program. This growing divide likely made Carson reluctant to feature Carlin as a regular guest. Carson preferred performers who respected the show's structure and maintained a certain decorum, while Carlin's unpredictable, boundary-pushing persona threatened that balance. Known for quietly distancing himself from guests who disrupted the flow or pushed too far, even if they were popular, Carson may have viewed Carlin's rising status as a countercultural icon as a risk. On a personal level, Carson's reserved, professional nature may not have aligned with Carlin's evolving image, particularly as he shed his clean-cut persona. Though Carlin was undeniably a comedic genius, his direction simply didn't fit Carson's vision for The Tonight Show, leading to a gradual cooling of their relationship. Shelley Winters was another guest who visibly tested Carson's patience. The Oscar-winning actress often made him appear uncomfortable during her appearances, and over time it became clear that Carson didn't enjoy having her on the show. The tension stemmed largely from Winters' outspoken, unpredictable behavior. She was famously brash and opinionated, frequently dominating conversations, interrupting Carson, challenging his questions, or veering off topic altogether. This unpredictability disrupted the smooth rhythm Carson prized. As a host who valued control, timing, and seamless flow, Carson reportedly found interviews with Winters chaotic and stressful, making their on-air dynamic tense, uneven, and difficult to manage. Johnny Carson, a master of smooth and controlled interviews, likely found Shelley Winters especially frustrating because she routinely ignored the unspoken rules of late-night television decorum. Her habit of seizing the spotlight clashed directly with Carson's carefully structured format. Winters had a reputation for being unpredictable and confrontational, turning her appearances into moments of tension rather than effortless entertainment. In one infamous incident, she reportedly removed her shoe and handed it to Carson during an interview, leaving him visibly irritated. While some viewers found her antics amusing, they likely wore on Carson, who valued professionalism and preferred guests who complimented his humor instead of overpowering it. Her larger-than-life persona may have been exhausting to manage live on air, particularly given Carson's own demeanor, a blend of Midwestern restraint and sharp wit, which stood in stark contrast to Winters' flamboyant, outspoken style. What might have been playful sparring often tipped into something combative, helping explain why Carson was reluctant to invite her back regularly. Another guest who reportedly strained Carson's patience was Tom Snyder, the intense and opinionated broadcaster best known for hosting Tomorrow. Though both men were giants of late-night television, their approaches could not have been more different. Snyder's commanding personality and tendency to dominate conversations often put him at odds with Carson's relaxed, humorous style. When Snyder appeared on The Tonight Show, he frequently took control of the dialogue, speaking at length and occasionally overshadowing Carson himself. Carson, who preferred to guide the interview and maintain an easy rhythm, likely found Snyder's refusal to defer to the host frustrating. Snyder's penchant for self-promotion and his brash delivery further complicated matters. Carson valued guests who played along with his jokes and helped create a collaborative, conversational tone. Snyder, by contrast, often steered discussions back to himself or his own program, disrupting the balance Carson worked hard to maintain. Their contrasting temperaments only deepened the divide. Carson was famously private and conflict-averse off-camera, while Snyder was known for his fiery opinions and confrontational energy. Adding another layer of tension, Snyder hosted Tomorrow immediately after The Tonight Show on NBC for years, making him feel less like a guest and more like a rival in Carson's orbit. Zsa Zsa Gabor was another personality who reportedly tested Carson's patience. The Hungarian-born actress and socialite, famous for her lavish lifestyle and flamboyant charm, often clashed with Carson's more understated, sarcastic humor. While Carson was skilled at engaging a wide range of guests, Gabor's exaggerated persona and constant attention-seeking could feel at odds with the show's rhythm. Her over-the-top manner may have frustrated Carson, who preferred wit and timing over spectacle, making her appearances entertaining for viewers but quietly irritating for the host. Zsa Zsa Gabor's appearances often proved challenging for Johnny Carson, largely because of her tendency to dominate the conversation. Known for her quick wit and larger-than-life persona, Gabor loved to talk, frequently at length, about her wealth, romances, and glamorous lifestyle. While some viewers found this captivating, it left Carson with little room to guide the interview or deploy his trademark, understated humor. Carson preferred guests who could banter with him and respond to subtle jokes, but Gabor's self-focused storytelling often threw off the show's rhythm, quietly testing his patience. Her flamboyant, diva-like behavior only added to the friction. Gabor leaned heavily into her image as an eccentric socialite, sometimes coming across as exaggerated or insincere. Carson, who valued authenticity and had a sharp instinct for pretense, likely found these theatrics grating. Complicating matters further was Gabor's habit of excessive flirting with male hosts, including Carson himself. He preferred to keep interviews light, witty, and professional, and her flirtatious approach could push the tone into uncomfortable territory. Another issue was Gabor's apparent lack of self-awareness. Carson excelled at gently poking fun at guests, using humor to disarm them or highlight contradictions. But Gabor's inability, or unwillingness, to laugh at herself meant those moments often fell flat, creating a noticeable disconnect. In the end, her dominating presence, diva-like manner, and mismatch with Carson's style made her a difficult guest. Though entertaining for audiences, her appearances often disrupted the balance Carson worked hard to maintain on The Tonight Show. Norman Mailer was another figure whose visits reportedly made Carson uneasy. Known for his controversial opinions, combative demeanor, and love of provocation, Mailer frequently brought tension to the set. One of the main sources of Carson's discomfort was Mailer's confrontational, argumentative style. He thrived on intellectual sparring and had a reputation for pushing boundaries, often challenging his interviewer or steering conversations into uncomfortable territory. Carson's approach, rooted in humor and easy conversation, clashed sharply with Mailer's antagonistic energy, making interviews feel exhausting rather than entertaining. Mailer also tended to dominate discussions, another point of friction. Carson was a master at pacing interviews and maintaining a balance between humor, storytelling, and insight, but Mailer often commandeered the spotlight, speaking at length and leaving little space for Carson to interject. His controversial reputation, shaped by outspoken views on politics, culture, and gender, further complicated matters. Carson carefully curated The Tonight Show to appeal to a broad audience, and Mailer's unpredictability and abrasive tone risked alienating viewers. Combined with Mailer's ego and intellectual bravado, so different from Carson's reserved professionalism, the dynamic rarely worked. While Carson could handle difficult guests with wit, Mailer's intensity and refusal to play along with the show's lighter tone likely made him one of the guests Carson least enjoyed hosting. Tony Curtis was undeniably a Hollywood icon, but his appearances on The Tonight Show often put him at odds with Johnny Carson's carefully crafted style. Curtis had a habit of dominating the conversation, launching into long, animated stories about his career, personal life, or behind-the-scenes Hollywood lore. While these anecdotes could be entertaining, they frequently left Carson with little space to steer the interview or deliver his signature, understated humor. Carson thrived on a sense of balance and give and take, and Curtis's tendency to monopolize the spotlight reportedly made those exchanges feel strained rather than playful. Curtis's larger-than-life personality and flair for self-promotion only deepened the tension. He often seemed eager to remind viewers of his stardom and accomplishments, which could disrupt the natural rhythm Carson worked to maintain. Carson favored guests who were self-aware and willing to laugh at themselves, and Curtis's brash confidence may have come across as grating. Adding to this was Curtis's unpredictability. His charm and theatrical instincts sometimes led him off topic or into attempts to upstage the host with jokes or antics. Even for a seasoned professional like Carson, these moments could turn interviews chaotic instead of smoothly entertaining, making Curtis an awkward fit for the tone Carson valued. Don Rickles, on the other hand, represented a very different kind of challenge. The legendary insult comic was both a guaranteed source of laughter and a recurring test of Carson's patience. Rickles's comedy was fast, relentless, and fearless, aimed at everyone in the room, Carson included. While Carson often played along and even embraced being the target, Rickles's tendency to take over the show could disrupt the balance Carson preferred. His unpredictability was a double-edged sword. It thrilled audiences but occasionally undermined Carson's sense of control over the show's flow. Rickles also had little regard for traditional talk show boundaries. He broke the fourth wall, roamed the stage, teased the audience, and even riffed on the production crew. One infamous moment came when Rickles damaged Carson's cigarette box while guest hosting, prompting Carson to storm onto the set of CPO Sharkey in a confrontation that was both hilarious and visibly tense. Although viewers loved the chaos, Carson generally favored structured comedy over total mayhem, and Rickles's antics pushed that preference to its limits. The comic's relentless teasing of Carson added another layer of tension. Rickles's jokes sometimes went beyond playful banter, touching on Carson's personal life or insecurities and forcing the host to work hard to maintain composure while keeping the audience entertained. Still, beneath the friction was genuine respect and a unique chemistry. Rickles's boundary-pushing humor produced some of the most memorable moments in The Tonight Show history, even if it also made him a guest who could both delight and quietly frustrate Johnny Carson at the same time.